The American Revolution was one of the most important events in world history. This was the first time that a group of colonies successfully overthrew an empire and created a new nation. In this video, we're going to examine the causes of the revolution. We'll also look at 3 of the most important battles and discuss how this war changed the course of world history. So, what caused the American Revolution? One of the biggest problems was that the 13 colonies were very far away from the seat of power in Great Britain. Most of the laws that Parliament passed had no real impact on the colonists, because they didn't apply to the unique situation in North America, and the colonists had no representation in Parliament, so they had no voice in making laws that affected them. By the middle of the 18th century, the relationship between Britain and its colonies had broken down beyond repair. The British government tightened control over the colonies in an effort to make them more profitable. The colonists resented this increased control and they felt that they were being treated unjustly, so they began to argue for more representation in Parliament. But when this failed, they decided to declare independence and start their own country. The first battle of the American Revolution took place on June 1775, and it was called the Battle of Bunker Hill. This battle was important because it showed the British that the colonists were serious about fighting for their independence, and it also demonstrated that the colonists were capable of holding their own against the mighty British army. At first, the British were confident that they would easily defeat the colonists. After all, the British army was one of the most powerful armies in the world, but the British soon realized that they had made a mistake. The colonists were led by some brilliant military commanders, such as General George Washington and General Israel Put, and they were able to use their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. As a result, the British suffered a humiliating defeat. Although the British won the battle, they suffered heavy casualties, which demonstrated that the Americans could hold their own. This gave the Americans hope that they could win the war, and it convinced many people around the world that the American cause was just. The next battle we're going to look at is the Battle of Saratoga. This was a turning point in the war because it convinced France to join the conflict. Before the battle, France was neutral in the war, but they were secretly supplying the colonists with weapons and ammunition. However, after the colonists won the Battle of Saratoga, France was convinced that the Americans had a chance of winning the war, so they officially joined the conflict and became a major player in the American Revolution. The Battle of Saratoga took place in September and October of 1777. It was one of the most important battles of the war, because it convinced France to join the conflict. The French were reluctant to get involved, but after the Americans won the battle, they were convinced that the colonists had a chance of winning the war, so they decided to throw their hat in the ring. The battle itself was a decisive victory for the Americans. They were able to surround the British and force them to surrender. This was a major blow to the British, and it essentially ended any hope they had of winning the war. One of the last major battles of the American Revolution was the Battle of Yorktown. This was the final major battle because it resulted in the surrender of British General Cornwallis and his army. This battle took place in October of 1781. It was a decisive victory for the Americans and it effectively ended the war. The battle was fought near Yorktown, Virginia, and it was the last major battle of the American Revolution. The British were attempting to escape to New York City, but they were trapped by American forces led by General George Washington. The British surrendered on October 19, 1781, and this effectively ended the war. This battle was important because it showed that the colonists were capable of winning a war against a superpower. It also demonstrated the importance of strategy and planning in warfare. The American victory at Yorktown led to the Treaty of Paris, which was signed on September 3, 1783. This treaty officially ended the war and it recognized the United States as a sovereign nation. Now let's look at why the American Revolution was such an important event in world history. First of all, the American Revolution was the first time that a group of colonies successfully overthrew an empire and created a new nation. This was a radical idea at the time, and it inspired other people around the world who were also fighting for independence. Secondly, the American Revolution was a major factor in the decline of European colonialism. Before the American Revolution, European powers had colonies all over the world. But after this war, it became clear that it was very difficult to control colonies that were far away. As a result, most European nations began to pull back from their colonies and focus on their home territories. Finally, the American Revolution had a major impact on the development of the United States. The newly created nation was based on the ideals of liberty and democracy, and this set the stage for the United States to become one of the most powerful and influential nations in the world. One of the biggest reasons that the American Revolution succeeded was because of the support of France. The French were eager to see the British humiliated, and they were willing to help the colonists in any way necessary. France supplied the colonists with weapons, ammunition, and food, and they also sent in troops to help fight the British. Without the help of France, it's unlikely that the colonists would have been able to win the war. Another reason that the American Revolution was successful was because of the leadership of George Washington. Washington was an excellent military commander, and he was able to keep the Continental Army together despite overwhelming odds. He was also a symbol of the American Revolution, and his presence inspired the colonists to keep fighting even when things looked bleak. A third reason that the American Revolution succeeded was because of the weakness of the British Empire. The British were stretched thin trying to control so many different colonies, and they simply did not have the resources to put down the rebellion in North America. Additionally, the British people were not really interested in fighting a war in North America. They knew that the colonies were far away and they didn't really care what happened to them. As a result, the British government did not commit enough troops to the fight, and this allowed the colonists to get the upper hand. The American Revolution was a long and bloody conflict, but it was ultimately a success. The 13 colonies won their independence from Britain, and they formed a new nation. Based on the ideals of liberty and democracy, this new nation would go on to become one of the most powerful and influential in the world. The American Revolution also had a major impact on world history. It marked the beginning of the end for European colonialism, and it inspired other people around the world to fight for their own independence. Now it's time to hear from you. What was your favorite part of the American Revolution? Let us know in the comments below. And if you'd like to learn more about this topic, we have lots of additional resources available. Thanks for watching.